All right. Hi. Welcome to our talk. My name is Kirill Boychenko. I'm a threat intelligence analyst at Recorded Future. I work on our technical team called Armor. And prior to joining Armor, I was on the team we call ACE, Advanced Cyber Crimes and Engagements. That's Hyundai's team. Prior to joining threat intelligence and cybersecurity field, I was working on combating human trafficking, defending human rights and labor rights for over 2 decades. I established rehabilitation centers for human trafficking victims. I trained law enforcement, judiciaries, attorneys when I was working at American Bar Association. I testified at the U.S. Trade Representative hearing challenging forced labor and child labor in the cotton industry. And this is just to say that between Hyundai and myself, we have many years of experience working on combating human trafficking and in the field of threat intelligence. Just to say, guys, that we're legit. We're standing here in front of you today. We are super grateful that you came. We know this is the final set of sessions today. We're very excited to share with you our knowledge, our experience, and our research. And please hear more from Hyundai.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Hyundai Guvan. Like Kirill mentioned, I'm a threat intel analyst on our Advanced Cyber Crimes and Engagements team. So that means my research primarily focuses on cybercrime, cyber criminal trends, and the dark web. I also lead our dark web collection efforts for our team. I got involved in the anti-human trafficking work through a hackathon we both did in May 2020, and something that basically started out as a passion project grew into a little bit more, so we're here today. And one thing I wanted to highlight before we go on with the rest of the talk is that this thing that we're going to show you today is part of an ongoing research, as part of a multi-report series that we based on the 4P framework that the world and the US uses in combating trafficking. And the 4Ps are protection, prevention, prosecution, and partnerships. And what we're showing you today is sort of our answer to the prosecution question, in that law enforcement could use this kind of framework to identify and then eventually prosecute traffickers.
In most of the presentations that we have seen, we've been overwhelmed with statistics, with definitions, with information about scale and magnitude of the problem. But today, because you guys came, you tuned in for our presentation, we believe that you know 2 facts: that human trafficking is a horrible crime that affects many people around the world, that there is no country that is immune, and the second thing, that it's a very profitable business for those who exploit others. So instead of focusing on statistical information, we would like to rather talk more about our research. After one of the trainings that I had with Italian police officers, it was after the training, it was end of the long work day. We were just chatting over beers, and I asked them. I was just curious because they were the cops who investigated some of the most dangerous cases. And I asked which cases were the scariest, the most difficult to investigate. And they told me that hands down, those were human trafficking cases. They said that those were some of the most dehumanizing, yet super challenging cases to investigate. And they said that the resources were lacking. They said that the understanding was lacking. They said that collaboration was hard to come by. So human trafficking is truly a monstrous crime. We believe there is good news, though. We believe that we, as cybersecurity and threat intelligence professionals, that we have something to offer. We can help. Today, we would like to walk you through our proof of concept model and methodology, where we employ common threat intelligence solutions to provide ways to address human trafficking. why we started this research in the first place is to be able to help first responders generate valuable leads. We also wanted to identify and analyze trafficking indicators. We wanted to cover multiple sources, but ultimately we wanted this research to be part of the solution. So what Hande and I aspire to is to go from scared to actionable and focus in our research on solutions that we can offer to the community. We will finish today by talking about the way forward on how we as cybersecurity and threat intelligence professionals can contribute to efforts on prevention of human trafficking. So more about our proof of concept research. We needed to know what to look for. And in order to do that, we had to understand keywords. Keywords are code words used by human traffickers to either lure potential victims or advertise exploitative services. We needed to know where, so we had to identify sources that we'll be looking to, from where we'll be looking to collect data. How was the technical part, which was us going onto those sources, collecting the data, aggregating data, and then analyzing it. And ultimately, we were looking to provide insights to understand the problem better and to use this solution to help first responders pivot, conduct more research, find valuable leads. None of these points are trivial to solve. Even understanding is hard to come by. I have a story to tell you to illustrate this. I was a member of an international team, and we were establishing rehabilitation centers in the countries of former Soviet Union. And so we had a project, and the project was to build a rehabilitation center in one of the largest cities in the former USSR space. So we set up a meeting. We had to have a meeting with the city mayor. We set up a meeting. That was not an easy feat, but we got it on the books. The day came, we came to see the mayor, and we were an international team, so we communicated in English. We brought an interpreter with us. But the mayor protested. He said, "My English is good. I don't need any interpretation. Let's just dive right in." So we showed him our paperwork. We explained about our funding. We said that building rehabilitation center for trafficking victims will help the community of this city, that this is vital, and that this large city will benefit from it. And then we went into all the details, and we showed all the materials and permits. We spent most of our time persuading the city mayor that this rehabilitation center for trafficking victims is super important. When we had a few minutes left, the mayor said, "Say no more. I get it. I get it, and I agree with you, because trafficking is a big problem in my city. We have very heavy traffic on city roads. Citizens all the time get in all sorts of accidents. We certainly need a rehabilitation center for those victims who get into accidents on our city streets and city roads." We're like, okay, we have 2 minutes. We completely misunderstand each other. Now we need to do something. So understanding is hard to come by. This is not trivial. And Hande and I, we saw our task to offer insights and better understanding on what this problem is. And for us, that meant that we consulted with first responders, law enforcement organizations, with non-governmental organizations that provide assistance to trafficking survivors. So we know that our proof of concept, our methodology makes sense.
So talking about our sourcing, we've primarily focused on open sources to kind of address that question. Let's talk about the dark web, right? So as part of our day-to-day jobs, Kirill and I both do research on the dark web, so we certainly know that there are legitimate threats coming from dark web sources. There are malicious actors on there. But on the other hand, we know that not every single digital crime happens on the dark web. A lot of it is actually in plain sight. Things are on the clear web. But the dark web is sort of a sexy word. It's a marketable word, so it gets overused. And we didn't want to contribute to that false premise that everything that's bad and that happens is happening on the dark web. So I'm sure that most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the famous or the infamous metaphor analogy of the iceberg for the internet, where the top part of it is the surface level internet, and underneath it we have the deep web under the water, and the deepest, darkest part of it is the dark web. So we find and we assess and we believe that much like the real life icebergs, the metaphor itself is also melting or is no longer that applicable. According to a research report by Recorded Future that was published in 2019, it found that live onion sites, live onion domains, only make up about 0.005% of live clear websites. So it's not this huge interconnected web of websites. A lot of times they are also unreliable, going down a lot, they're disorganized, and then what we found is that there is a smaller subset of actual legitimate, popular and prolific dark websites where a lot of the threats are emanating from. And those are often invitation only or at least requiring membership. So that's something that we wanted to, like a misunderstanding that we wanted to combat as well. So talking about sources, instead we focused, as you can tell from the name of our talk, on classified sites that are similar to Backpage. But in addition to that, as internet evolves, human trafficking has evolved as well. So human traffickers now use a range of sources, including review sites for illicit massage parlors, social media platforms, encrypted chat platforms, and more. According to a joint research done by UNODC and US Department of State, they found that traffickers use fake employment opportunities, especially Russian traffickers on the Russian social media site VK, to advertise fake modeling opportunities abroad. And as part of this operation, as part of this campaign, they were able to recruit and victimize more than 100 women under the false premise of employment abroad. The same report also found that in cases where trafficking starts on social media, victims tend to be a lot younger, just likely due to the fact that social media is so popular among younger audiences. Going back to classified sites and Backpage. So for those of you who might not be familiar, Backpage was a classifieds website that was active in the United States between 2004 and 2018. It sort of operated similarly to Craigslist, with the couple exceptions being that it had low to no content moderation, and there were specific sections dedicated to adult services, which then made it a hub for trafficking online. Even though it's no longer active, as you can see in the screenshots that we've taken, the same business model, excuse me, and even the same branding is being used by other classified sites today. So Backpage, like I said, is no longer active. It was seized by the US Department of Justice in April 2018, and under the charges related to money laundering and prostitution, including ads depicting the prostitution of children. So this move was criticized by some, who argued that the closure of the website actually made it more difficult for sex workers to vet dangerous clients and for law enforcement to track traffickers. And what we found is that after Backpage went away, the demand for it didn't go away. Like we were looking at in the previous slide, similar sites popped up, so it sort of decentralized the service to multiple other ones. And in our research, we collected data from 8 classified sites that use the name Backpage in either their domains or in their branding. And Kirill will tell you a little bit more about our data collection methods and overall methodology.
So we, like Hande said, we collected data from selected 8 Backpage-like websites. We collected over 66,000 posts, specifically from adult classified pages. And we identified some points of contact. We found over 17,000 unique phone numbers. We found over 3,000 unique email addresses. And the unique part is important here because those that are not unique, they just keep appearing. They keep appearing across multiple listings. They keep appearing across multiple sources. More about phone numbers. So here is a breakdown of phone numbers that we identified in our data sets. You can see that mostly it's in relation to states of the US, and you see the top is California, followed by Florida, New York, New Jersey, Texas. California is at over 18%. And we know from our own research and from research of first frontline defenders and law enforcement testimonies that human traffickers use point of contacts when they lure and advertise exploitative services. They leave their phone numbers, they leave their email addresses, you can identify usernames. So this was all important data for us to include in our methodology. As for other, you can see that there is over 14% followed after California there on the slide. Those were references to other countries, so not the US. And we found that over 45,000 references were about the US and the states of the US, but other countries would also appear in our data sets, such as Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, France, Egypt, the Dominican Republic. That was a small fraction of what we identified, but that data was present there. We believe that Backpage-like websites, they cater to US audience more so than to audience of other countries. We found that only half of the sources had dedicated sections for other countries. And mostly it was United States oriented. And not only area codes that we would identify that this phone number belongs to this state and country, the countries were also referenced in the listings. The keywords, as you remember, we mentioned this, the keywords were important for us to enable research. And keywords or terms or jargon or code words used by human traffickers, the way for us to compile a list like that was to go through similar research, through research of non-governmental organizations that provide services to trafficking survivors, to look through court testimonies, court records and law enforcement testimonies, survivor testimonies to compile a list of keywords. We found that some listings contain commodifying and derogatory language, and that came in that came as describing people as objects, like something you can buy and sell, like items on a marketplace. And keywords were also important for us to identify specific behaviors or patterns. Let us go through all of this in more detail so you know exactly what we found in our research. Here are some examples of keywords. This is not everything. We have a big list, and the two reports that we wrote, both of them are public. Our first report contains a long list of keywords in 4 languages, and this is just some of them. But like I mentioned, we were able to crowdsource that list, and we believe it's important that organizations that work on combating human trafficking, they make their research public. We did. And those other organizations that did as well, it was helpful for us to find those keywords and compile our own list. Here's an example of querying our data sets with keywords such as arrived, arrival, and by. And this is just an illustration, and we have many, many more, but we ultimately decided not to show you the most egregious ones because the level of derogatory, explicit language is overwhelming. Still, we wanted to show you some examples. So here is going back to objectifying humans as items on the menu or objects that can be traded, bought and sold. This is the kind of language that you can identify with keywords. That can become one of the identifiers, and we'll talk more about this. Here we are querying our data sets with the keyword management. Human traffickers are notorious for advertising exploitative services as independent and self-organized. We found that the level of explicit derogatory language, additional red flags in some of the listings, they don't suggest that this is a nature of independency and self-organization. It's rather managed. And especially it becomes clear when you see a phone number that appears across multiple sources, dozens and dozens of listings. That rather suggests to us the organized nature of these listings. And also additional, when you couple it with other identifiers and indicators, and Hande will talk about this more, then you have potential leads.
Another example we have again here from our research is another identifier is the existence of multiple locations for potential sites of meetup, just because that could refer to a trafficking circuit or a trafficking corridor. And what that is a trafficking circuit is a route or a route or a transportation route that traffickers use that includes at least 2 major cities and often spans a large geographic area. So for example, a popular trafficking circuit within the US is the West Coast route that starts in Las Vegas, Nevada, and goes up the coast towards Portland and then Seattle. Over here you can see that the potential sites range from Galveston, Texas to Cannon Beach, Oregon, then to Santa Monica, Los Angeles. So again, that is likely a place where traffickers are moving individuals, moving the victims between sites of commercial exploitation. That became an identifier that we were also looking at in our research. So we've been talking a little bit about identifiers, about keywords, and before we go further than that, I want to clarify some of these terms. When we're saying identifier, we're talking about the content of the listings or the context of the listings. It could be anything from keywords that we've mentioned so far to the presence of multiple locations, things like management being mentioned, and so forth. And then when we say indicator, we're talking about particular entities that have a specific format, so usernames, email addresses, phone numbers, domains. So that's sort of similar to indicators of compromise as we are used to using them in information security. And the idea here is that we need to be combining those two things and using them together to narrow down our data. So Kirill was saying we got more than 60,000 results, right? Just raw data. If we were to do a keyword search in it for just women, petite, or woman, some of the more commonly used keywords, that would still bring back thousands of results. To be able to fine-tune that, we would then add additional keywords that were higher risk or the presence of multiple locations and some of the other identifiers that we had come up with. From the remaining a few hundred results, we would be able to either export all of the indicators that we had found for later use, or narrow it down even further to the references that contained high risk, known to be potentially suspicious indicators inside of them. So that's sort of in rough strokes the type of analysis we did on the data. And the idea here is that there is no single way, there is no short-proof way to identify human trafficking online. That's why we need to be looking at it holistically, using various things in combination with one another to cut down the noise and get to a few hundred results that we can then dig into deeper, that we can investigate. So what do we do after getting down to a few hundred results? We used open source intelligence tools to dig into them further. In this respect, we found that email addresses were a bit more fruitful because they led us to more data points. Using OSINT tools, we were able to identify other associated email accounts with the original email address. And the idea here is that we were able to surface partial or full names, appearance information, physical appearance information, build a timeline of digital activity associated with that original email address. In some cases, these kinds of investigations led us to social media sites where videos or other content were posted. We shared those with relevant law enforcement authorities, and they could, these social media posts could also be further analyzed for geographic location information. Another way that a similar approach to what we did could be used specifically by law enforcement is to combine these indicators and identifiers to get to a place where you're left with leads, and then use them together to obtain and serve subpoenas to commercial communication service providers, so things like Yahoo or Google. For reference, within our data set of more than 60,000 results, all of the 97% of all identified email addresses had a gmail.com domain. So if you were able to kind of prove that there is enough reason to share data with law enforcement, for the commercial provider to share data with law enforcement, they'd be able to get more information, including names, phone numbers, sign-in, IP addresses that were used to sign in, and more. And you're probably thinking, you can create a Google account, a Gmail account with fake information. So, of course, there's fake or inaccurate information in there, but the second step would be to compel ISPs, internet service providers, to share data related to and information points related to IP addresses. That would give you kind of more credible data related to the names, geographic locations, and so forth. And this isn't all hypothetical either. There's actual case law precedents for it. Specifically in United States versus Shield from 2006, law enforcement authorities used the fact that one of the email addresses contained in a data set they were looking at was suggestive. The email address was Little Lolita Love. Used the fact that that was a suggestive enough email address to compel relevant parties to turn in email records because of suspected child exploitation. So there is kind of precedent for it, and it could be kind of formalized in this way. One example of a similar approach is from last year, March 2022, Operation March Sadness in Florida. What they did in this operation was detectives basically searched through online advertisements, prostitution advertisements, to identify any instances where trafficking might be happening. And then they reached out to the operators and set up meetings, which then led to the arrests of 108 individuals. And the idea here is that they didn't use the exact thing that we're proposing, but it could have saved them some time. That's like one hope here. And also you'll remember from earlier on, Kirill was talking about the fact that we actually surfaced a lot of Florida numbers in our data set. So this is sort of the idea that it could be used by law enforcement, it could make things easier, it could make things more efficient. Another example comes from Anti-Trafficking Intelligence Initiative, ATII. They conducted a research into OnlyFans for indications of child exploitative material and trafficking. And what they did is, and their research is online, you can look it up as well, they basically use Google and open sources to do keyword-based queries. They've included in their report some of the keywords as shown in the slides, and there are 3 takeaways here for me from this research. First, they used a similar methodology, keywords, open sources, and they created valuable leads. The second thing is they arrived at a similar conclusion as we did. If you look at the code over there, they're also saying that, hey, there isn't a single way that we can identify this. You need to be looking at multiple indicators. And the third thing, which I think is actually the most important one, is the fact that they published their report publicly for researchers like us to take some of that methodology, take some of the takeaways, and carry the baton forward, carry the research forward. And that's the idea that we also were inspired by. That's why we wanted to make everything public, and that's why we're here today, talking to all of you. The idea of being stronger together.
There's no research that comes without its challenges. We had our own. Some of the challenges stemmed from collections, sources, backpage-like sources. Some of them are just very slow. They go down. Some of them not very stable. Another thing that we found is that many backpage-like sources just don't date their listings. There's no year, no month, no day, no time, and it complicates your research and analysis. We believe that this is potentially an evasive technique by these sources. Something else that we found as a challenge was indicator versus true positive. Hande already mentioned that from a large data set you get a lot of noise. How do you find indicators? How do you find false, true positive, false positive? How do you identify all of those things? That's a challenge on its own. That's when keywords come into play. That's when you find those same indicators like phone numbers and email addresses, usernames that keep appearing dozens and dozens of times across multiple listings, multiple sources. We believe that there is no indicator that confirms human trafficking. It's a combination of things. Ultimately, we need to look to experts, survivor-led organizations, law enforcement, non-governmental organizations that provide assistance to survivors. They know how this works. And so building on what they have built on their foundation, we can find answer to this challenge. Some further research ideas: continuous data harvesting and monitoring. Continuous data harvesting can help us with this evasiveness of sources. We can build a timeline. We can know when exactly the listing was made. We can prove or disprove certain hypotheses. We can build timelines and see increases or decreases in activity. Then we can do more of everything. We can find more sources. We can get more keywords. We can apply our methodology to other sources, to other completely other different sources, but we can employ same techniques that we had for our research. As for way forward, we believe awareness is very important. That's why we decided to work on this research. That's why we wanted to present it to you today. We believe that we should not act alone. We should try to not to duplicate efforts, but rather support one another. We believe that we need a standard operating procedure in place, a plan. Our plan was to consult with first responders before our research, during and after. When we identified that California was on the top of phone numbers identified in our data sets, we reached out to California-based non-governmental organization that's specifically working in this field. We provided them with the data. We got some positive response. We provided all our best leads to law enforcement organizations. We spoke to experts in the field. As for ensure that mitigation is survivor-focused, what that means is, number one, do no harm. Contribute to ongoing efforts, work together with organizations that work in the field. There is a way to join forces. For example, in the United States, there are anti-trafficking task forces, but many other countries have similar institutions. They may be called differently, but the idea is the same, is that different organizations, different individuals, they convene, they work together trying to find ways to address human trafficking. And it's not only for law enforcement and non-governmental organizations as one may think. Researchers can join, we can join. I was a member of 3 task forces in Minnesota, Washington, D.C., and Alaska. And I know that when people convene there, sometimes there are groups when there are only law enforcement or only service providers, but there's always one convention at some point when everyone is together and people are talking about ideas on what can be done. They're discussing specifics. We can participate. Ultimately, what practitioners that attend those meetings, what they look at is they're looking at 4P paradigm, is something that Hande already mentioned.
Thank you. Like before we end, one thing I did want to mention, so we mentioned the 4P paradigm. That's what we based our research on. It's just one installment. What we show today is one installment in a multi-part series. So it's ongoing, and we're working on something else that we're hoping to publish later in the year. So if you have questions or collaborative ideas, recommendations, what have you, we'll be sticking around after. And if you don't have those, which is fine, just be on the lookout for further research coming out from us related to this topic, because the idea, again, like I said, is to be stronger together. So any feedback that you have, we appreciate. Thank you so much for coming to our talk. Any questions you have, I think we still have some time. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for doing this. It's some pretty heavy stuff, obviously. So I respect you guys for doing this research. My question is, given the case of like Jeffrey Epstein and the various like implications that had for like society as a whole, for seeing which individuals were implicated in like the trafficking and the abuse, like business executives, high levels of people in academia, as well as I think it was law enforcement as well. Have you actually hit any roadblocks in your investigations from law enforcement at any time during your investigation?
We have not. So it wasn't a case of, people trying to silence us in this way. But I understand what you're trying to say also, the fact that, if this kind of work is getting support, trafficking work is getting support from higher up people in the society, how will that work? But the idea here is that it's a huge industry, right? So by doing work that, like grassroots work that is targeting the most profitable aspects of it, we think that that could still be really valuable and make real change. Hope that answers your question, though.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I was just curious, is there any financial paper trail you guys can track or latch onto? I mean, I'm sure cryptocurrency is a big part of it, but maybe in your work with ISPs and IP address, cross matching, have you guys made any progress there or anything useful there?
No, I think that's super useful. Not in this particular installment of the research, but like I said, it's ongoing. That is something that we would love to look at in the further iterations of this research. It's not going to be the same thing again, just focusing on different portions of it, right?
Yeah, and maybe to jump on this, you have a great idea, and at some point it crossed our minds, and we're
Yeah.
like, what if we can see cryptocurrency wallet addresses in our data sets? We were looking. We didn't find what we were looking for, but the idea is interesting to follow the money, definitely.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Obviously, here we have a very weighty subject, and I really appreciate that you guys communicated the true gravity of the situation. I'm curious how you as individuals, as humans, remain grounded while sifting through and investigating this sort of data that is probably often very hard to read, hard to witness. How do you remain grounded while you're communicating that to others and really trying to get support that, hey, this is an issue that needs to be taken care of?
I'll let you answer. You've been doing it longer than I.
Yeah, for us it was teamwork. That's what kept us sane. It's when you are on your own, scary. But when you have great colleagues and you're looking at this together, and you try to put your OSINT detective hat on, like, okay, how do we solve this? How do we find more indicators? How can we follow this lead? So you're trying to turn certain emotions and thoughts off. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It can get pretty heavy, but the teamwork helped us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to our
Thank
talk.
you.